Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Ladies and gentlemen, first let me start off by saying thank you very much to the community member that sent me an email with this interview of the president of the World Bank warning everyone in public, ladies and gentlemen. This is not just us crazy prepper channels that are talking about this. They are warning us. I personally believe that this is a game that the elite play. They warn the public. Right? They warn the public of what's coming down the line. That way, when it finally arrives, they can say, hey, we warned you. Right? And what he's talking about here is nothing good, ladies and gentlemen. He is pretty much warning us that inflation will persist for years to come and that food shortage crisis will persist as well for as many as 3 or more years. Personally, I think it'll be well over 3 years, just because of the damage that we've already done to our infrastructure by cutting down our energy, most of all. Because remember, energy equals calories. And without energy, we will have no food, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and play a few short clips, and then I'm going to intervene in hopes that I don't get a copyright strike, and that they don't take the video down. So I've cut it into a few short segments, and I'm going to go ahead and intervene in between to give you my thoughts on that segment.
I mean, global inflation, it's not just the U.S., it's other wealthy countries around the world, but you're also describing a recipe for global instability.
It feeds in when there's not enough food that for weaker countries, poorer countries, that causes instability, and it's a big factor in the turnover of governments that's been occurring in quite a few of the countries.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to focus on one thing. He's talking about poorer countries. He's saying, yes, this is going to affect poorer countries because they can't afford it, right? But you have to understand the world that we are living in, especially if you live in the United States or one of the Western nations that has its own central bank that can print money out of thin air, or fiat currency really out of thin air. Now, why does this matter? Because let's talk about the dollar. What is the dollar backed by? Many people think it's oil, but no, it's not oil. Right? Many nations use the dollar because of the SWIFT system. It is a way for nations to interact monetarily with each other with the SWIFT system, which is an easy way to get money from A to B. So in order for them to interact with that system, they have to use US dollars. Saudi Arabia is no longer playing ball with the United States. They grabbed their bat, their ball in their glove, and now they're playing with China. Think about that. That's what really gives our dollar, the U.S. Federal Reserve note, any backing, is that other countries need it. They need it in order to interact via the SWIFT system. Does anyone here or anyone watching this video think that that's going to last forever? With the way that the United States has abused its power of holding the reserve currency of the world, by threatening other nations and sanctioning other nations when they don't do what the United States government wants them to do. Do you think that once other nations have the ability to use something else to trade with, that they will continue to trade with the dollar, knowing that the dollar is not really backed by anything with the exception of the labor of you and me? Because as long as we labor and we pay taxes, we can continue paying interest on all of those bonds that people have purchased or other countries have purchased that are collecting interest off of them. That's really the only thing that backs up the dollar, ladies and gentlemen, that gives it any strength, is that other countries are still using it for trade until they no longer are. And because you and I, we work and we are taxed, and then we can take those tax dollars that the government collects from us and pay interest on those people that loan the U.S. money. What happens when that is no more? Do you think that we will be able to import at prices that are affordable to the average working man or woman? I think not. A good example that I have of a country that once had great wealth and still does, but their financial system fell apart, is Venezuela. Venezuela at one point sitting on the world's largest reserve of oil. All right, ladies and gentlemen, sitting on the world's largest reserve of oil, their currency was so worthless that they couldn't even pay to have more currency printed. That's where we're headed, ladies and gentlemen, because once the world wakes up to the fact that they no longer have to use the dollar and the U.S. no longer has the might to enforce that other countries use the dollar, we're going to be headed the way of Venezuela, and everything that we need to live will become extremely expensive and very scarce. Because although we have the resources here in the United States to build and to grow what we need, we no longer have the infrastructures. We pretty much import all of the things that we need in order to grow food. We import fertilizer. We import machinery parts. For goodness gracious, we're now importing energy when we were once energy independent. So this is what you have to be thinking about. If you live in a country, not a world, in a country that is supposedly a wealthy nation.
COVID caused the deepest global recession since World War II. Now, the world economy is in danger because of this Russian invasion in Ukraine.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to go ahead and interject in that part right there. You have to understand that it was not this health crisis that caused this recession, world recession, whatever you want to call it. It was not the health crisis. It was the policies that were instituted by governments. Right? I did a video a while back. You're more than welcome to go watch it. It's on Rumble, where I went ahead and I took the top 5 states in the United States that imposed the most heavy restrictions on its citizenry, and the top 5 states that imposed the lightest restrictions, some of them none at all. And just go take a look at that video, and it will give you 100% assurance that it was not the health crisis that caused what's going on, that it was the policies by the government.
So if you were talking to Jerome Powell, the chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve, you would say focus less on interest rates, focus more on what?
He's got multiple tools. One is regulatory policy. The Fed is an important regulator of banks, so let the banks lend more. But then also on the bond side, reducing the bond portfolio would return more money to banks. All of the money being used to hold the bond portfolio comes from banks. And if they had more, they could lend. And also the non-bank sector of the U.S. economy, that's one of the most innovative, and it could put more money into the supply chain. It's going to take months and months and maybe 2 years to bring inflation back down.
Now, pretty much, ladies and gentlemen, what he's saying here is create more inflation. Create more inflation so we can take care of the problem of inflation. And to put more money in the hands of banks and corporations. What have we learned from the past? That whenever you give banks and corporations a blank check, what do they do with it? They enrich themselves and their buddies with it. But how? They do stock buybacks. Just like the airlines did with the $25 billion bailout that we gave them. Just like the banks did with the multi-billion dollar bailouts that we gave them. Did they hire more people? No. Did they buy more planes? No. Did they build more buildings? No. What did they do? They bought back their stock, creating an artificial shortage of stock in the market, right? Because the more stock that you buy, the less stocks there are to buy in the market. And what does that do? It raises the price of the stocks. And then who owns a lot of those stocks? Their CEOs and their higher ups in their corporations or companies, making them more wealthy, making the shareholders more wealthy, but doing absolutely nothing for the economy. The only tools that the Federal Reserve has, in my opinion, is they can print more money by buying bonds from banks, and the banks buy from the government. Because you see, the Federal Reserve can't just buy bonds from the government. So the banks buy the bonds, which they can, and then they sell those bonds to the Federal Reserve. Right? That's how the Federal Reserve funds the government, through the back door. So they can do that, and they can lower interest rates. And what does lowering interest rates do? It makes it more favorable for banks to loan out money, because it's easier to loan out money because it's less expensive to borrow. Let's say, for example, you were paying $500,000 for a house and you needed to borrow $500,000 at 1%. It'd be a lot cheaper to purchase that loan at 1% than it would at 3 or 4 or 5% or almost 6%, which is where I think mortgages are right now for the 30-year. So that's the only thing that the Federal Reserve can do. They can print money and buy bonds. And what I mean by printing money is printing money to buy bonds, and then they can lower interest rates, which is inflationary as well, because more money is created out of thin air every time that someone borrows money. Whenever you go and get a bank loan for whatever it is, for a car, for a motorcycle, for a house, for a boat, for a yacht, whatever, whenever you borrow money, that money never existed until you and the bank manager signs that document committing and then obligating that money into existence. So the lower the interest rates are, the easier that it will be to get money out into the economy, but the more inflationary that is. So ladies and gentlemen, right now, all they're doing is they're exposing their plan to us. This is their plan. Number one, create a health crisis. Now, come along with me on this journey right here, because this makes perfect sense, and this is what they are doing. Create a health crisis, right? And then follow up that health crisis with mandates and regulations and laws and stuff like that that pretty much ruins our economy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, once our economy has been ruined, guess what? Inflation takes hold. And now with all of this inflation, farmers can't buy feed for their animals. They can't buy seeds because it's so expensive. They can't buy fertilizer, right? They can't. We have we have shortages in everything, but mainly energy. That's the main thing, energy, right? We have shortages in natural gas, and what does that do? We can't make fertilizer without natural gas, right? So they create a crisis by creating mandates and regulations and laws and all that stuff that puts us into a deep recession, which is where I believe we are now, where everything is more expensive, people cannot afford it, people are suffering. And then what they'll do is they will let this simmer. They will let it simmer, allow it to get worse and worse and worse over time. And then when the people have finally had enough, they will introduce their solution. And the people will ask for it. The people will say, yes, please give it to me. Because they just want to eat. And that solution, ladies and gentlemen, will be a CBDC, a centrally banked digital currency. The end.
So a State Department official said a few days ago, food crisis will be at least a 3-year problem. What time horizon do you put on the food crisis and the energy crisis?
I'll say one thing. It's possible to produce enough to soften that crisis. But at the rate that we're going right now, the fertilizer isn't being made. You know, fertilizer comes, a giant source of fertilizer is from natural gas through the ammonium channel into the most useful fertilizer. And it also is used to make the electricity that converts the minerals into fertilizer. And that's just not happening. So a lot of the world is shutting down for lack of fertilizer. And then those shortages of crops will last for multiple years.
So what can you do? Protect yourself. Prepare now while there is still stuff on the shelves. Get it now, even if you live in the wealthiest nation in the world. Get it now, because eventually it will not be there. And God forbid if we do have an economic collapse where the dollar becomes worthless, because that will just accelerate their final solution, ladies and gentlemen. It will only accelerate their final solution. And then you will be in a position where you will only be able to buy what they tell you you can buy when they tell you that you can buy it. So don't listen to me. Listen to that gentleman right there. And I'm calling him a gentleman for lack of better words. But don't listen to me, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to him. Stock up, because he's telling you that we're headed into a food crisis, a food shortage crisis. It will be here eventually. And when it gets here, if you're not prepared, then you will suffer. And what about your children? Should they suffer because of your ignorance? Because you refuse to listen, to just go out there and get a little extra every time and put it away. It's not that difficult. If you need to get a second job, get it now so that you can prepare with it. Because the more that you have put away, the more time you will have to act for yourself, to retain your sovereignty, to be able to practice your free will and not theirs. Having said that, I'll leave it off at that because I feel a rant coming on. So have a great day, ladies and gentlemen. Remember to be good to each other. When good people do good things happen. Remember to reach one, teach one, and repeat. If we all did this, the world would be a better place, and you know that it will be a better place. Many blessings to all of you and your families. I'm Alaska Prepper. I'm out.